In this lecture, we're going to look at changing the WordPress defaults. There are two main ways to install WordPress. You can either install it through an option in the control panel for your hosting account, or alternatively, you can download it directly from the WordPress website. Both methods are pretty easy to do, but there are things that you can do in both methods that people usually skip, or just don't consider, and doing these things can increase the security of your WordPress installation quite considerably. So in this lecture, we're going to look at how to make WordPress more secure while performing WordPress's famous 5-minute install. One of the first things you need to do if you're going to install WordPress through the famous 5-minute install is to create a database for WordPress to install its data in. Remember, WordPress is a content management system, and as such it doesn't have static HTML files like a conventional old-style website. With a CMS, or content management system, pages are generated on the fly when they're requested by a visitor to the website. The content is pulled out of the database and it will be displayed in the layout and style determined by the theme you're using. If you lose your database, then you've lost your content, and as such your website, and that is why it's important to make sure that your database is secure. The WP config file contains all the information needed to access your database, and in another lecture we will look at what can be done to secure that file, but for now let's take a look at how we can make WordPress more secure when we install it. So let's start by creating the database we're going to use for WordPress. Throughout this lecture I'm working on the assumption that you're going to be installing WordPress into the root of the public HTML directory for your website, and that you don't already have a site installed on your account. So let's get started. Go to your hosting account and log into the control panel for your domain. Look for the database section in your control panel. Chances are, like me, you're probably using cPanel. If you are, then this is what you're looking for. The styling may be different, but the content will be the same. And the icon you're looking for is the one that says My SQL Database Wizard. Click on that when you find it. The first step in the wizard is creating an empty database. There are two parts to the database name. The first part is the bit before the underscore, and that's determined by your hosting account normally. The second part of the database is where you give it a unique name. Pick something cryptic that is a mixture of letters and numbers. Don't call it WP or WordPress, as these are far too easy for anyone to guess. In the above example, I've still got the letters WP in the name, but nobody's going to guess the database name. When you've decided on a name, click the Create Database button. The next step in the process is to create a user ID and password. This is the database user that will be used by WordPress whenever it needs to access the database. As with the database name, this is a two-part name, with the account ID at the front, an underscore, and then the bit that you make up at the end. And as with the database, make this something obscure and not WP or WordPress, or a repeat of the account name. Now for the password. You're free to make up any password you want, and there is a coloured meter that displays the weakness or strength of your chosen password. However, there is a password generator button right next to the strength meter, and clicking on this will take you to a pop-up that will generate a secure password that nobody is ever going to guess. You'd be crazy not to use this, so click on the button to generate a secure password. Every time you click on the Generate Password button, a new password will be generated for you. There are advanced options that let you control things, such as the length of the password and whether it will have uppercase letters, lowercase, or a mixture, and whether you want symbols, numbers, or a mixture of these. To be honest, the default setting is just right, so there's no need to fiddle with the advanced settings. Given that you can't pronounce the password, and you aren't going to have to remember it in your head, I can't see why you wouldn't just accept the first password suggestion it throws at you. But whether you do or you don't, whatever password you decide on, make sure that you copy it and paste it into Notepad or something similar to keep a temporary record of it, because you're going to be pasting it into the config file very shortly. This is your only chance to copy this, so make sure you do it now. When you've saved it, click on the Use Password button. You're now taken back to the screen where you were creating the database user, and you'll notice that the password fields are now populated with the password you just generated. Well, they're populated with something to mask out the password, but underneath it, that is your password. So with that done, click on the Create User button. We've just got a couple more steps to do in the database setup process. We're going to need to add the user to the database and then say what the user is allowed to do with the database. So in this screen, because there is only one database and one user, both of which we just created, they will show us the defaults in their respective drop-downs. If you had other databases and users on your site, then just choose the ones you created for WordPress. When you have the WordPress database and user showing, click on the Add button. All we need to do is say that the user is allowed to do anything he wants with the database, rather than clicking all the individual boxes. All you need to do is click on the All Privileges box, and the rest should be filled in automatically. When you've done that, click on the Make Changes button, and the only thing left to do is write down the database user and database name. Remember, both of these are in the form of account underscore then the name you chose. You need the whole thing, the bit before, the underscore, and the bit after to form the full name. Now that the database we're going to use for WordPress is all set up, let's download WordPress and get it installed. Go to wordpress.org, and right there on the home page is the download button. Click on this and download the file to your computer. Now go to wherever you saved the file and extract the contents. I'm using Windows and the file is a zip file, so for me it's simply a case of right clicking on the file and choosing Extract All. Browse to wherever you extracted the files and look for a file called wp-config sample.php. Open this up in a text editor that handles plain text files, not a word processor, as this is likely to insert all sorts of funny characters that you don't want in there. With the wp-config sample file open in your text editor, look for 3 lines that we're going to edit: the database name, the username, and the password. Remember the details you saved from when you created the database? Paste them into the appropriate sections between the single quotes so that when you have finished it looks something like this, but with your details in there instead of mine, obviously. After you've entered the database name, username and password, scroll further down the file until you see this section which contains the keys and salts. WordPress doesn't use session IDs to preserve state, instead it uses cookies on your local computer. Adding lengthy and complex strings here is a way to make them even more secure. If you don't use these keys, and an awful lot of sites don't, then WordPress will still generate keys and store them in the database. So why do we need to generate our own if WordPress automatically generates keys for us? Well, all it would take is for someone to gain access to the database, and they would have access to the keys. If you have the keys in the config file, then it makes it more difficult for the hacker, and gives you the opportunity to change the keys any time you want, quickly and easily. If you look in the commented area above where the keys go, you'll see a URL. Copy and paste that address into your web browser. When you go to that address, it will present you with a window that contains something like this. Every time you refresh the page, you generate a new set of keys. To use these keys, just highlight and copy the contents of the window. Go back to the file you've been editing and paste everything you just copied over the entire block. Now we have one more thing to change in the config file. Scroll down the file further until you see this line saying table prefix. The default table prefix is WP_, and every hacker knows that, and they'll use that as a starting point if they're trying to gain access to your WordPress tables. You can replace WP_ with whatever you want, but I'd recommend a random string of upper and lower case letters combined with numbers, maybe 6 to 8 characters in total, followed by an underscore at the end. And that's it for editing your config file. Make sure that you save the file now that you've edited and save it as wp-config.php. Basically the name it had before, but without the dash sample at the end.